This is Richard R.J. Eskow for Free Speech TV here at Netroots Nation, and we are talking now with Vincent Warren. Vince Warren is the Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. If you don't know them, you should, because they're doing very important work. So first of all, Vince, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks, RJ. It's great to be here.
So tell us, first of all, what brings you to Netroots Nation?
You know, I've been coming to Netroots for a number of years. This might be over 10 years I've been coming, maybe 9 years. And what I love about it is that it's a great place to meet a whole bunch of folks from a range of the progressive community. So they're the social justice activists, radical types like myself, and they're the blue state Democrat people. But it's an opportunity for people to come together, exchange ideas, exchange information. It gives us an opportunity at the Center for Constitutional Rights to talk about some of the work and the cases that we're doing that can inspire activists. And what I've noticed, particularly in the last couple of years, is that it's been really great on bringing in local activists to participate with people that are doing work nationally. And there's just magic when that happens. So.
You know, you guys are at the intersection of, in my mind, of so many critical issues. And I guess I'd start, before we go back to the activism, because I do want to talk to you about that. I want to talk a little bit about, since you've been coming here for so long and you've been working with the group for the Center for Constitutional Rights for so long, did you have any idea 10 years ago or even 5 years ago how much in the center of the whirlwind you guys would wind up being in 2018?
No, I mean, first of all, it was hard to imagine what the whirlwind looks like. The last 2 years have been extraordinary. So at some level, no, it was hard to imagine that we would be in the place as a country that we are. One thing I will say about CCR, we've been around for 50 years, and so all you have to do is look at our clients, the people that we're representing, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on in the country politically. So when we first started out in the 1960s, it was black sharecroppers in Mississippi. In the 1970s, it was women who were seeking abortions and women who were being discriminated against in the workplace, anti-war activists. The 1980s, we took on the Klan. The 1990s, we were working with Native American folks. 2001, right after September 11th, from that point to now, so many of our clients are Muslim, South Asian, or Arab. We also represent black and brown folks, people connected with the Black Lives Matter movement. So, you know, I think at some level you can't predict the moment, but the thing that you can do is you can see how the politics replicate themselves, and if you're working really closely with social movements, the people that are most affected will tell you the thing that they're seeing, and that's usually the next edge. So it's been, as horrible as it's been to be in this current moment, it's been somewhat gratifying for us to be in that center of the whirlwind with, I think, what we have to share, which are our litigation and advocacy skills in connection with movement groups, to be able to push back, because we need all hands on deck these days.
Oh, absolutely. And again, we're talking with Vincent Warren, Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. I feel as if there are almost two currents always underway with our constitutional rights. One is that ever-changing, that dynamic force of the way in which our rights conflict with political, social, economic events on a broader scale. The other is that there's this underlying, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but there's this underlying challenge of making sure that all of the American people understand what their constitutional rights mean and support their constitutional rights. I'm thinking of those surveys that are periodically done. You see about them, you know, you saw them during the Clinton years, the Bush years, the Obama years, where even before Donald Trump came along, there was a significant percentage of the nation's population that doesn't understand what our rights are or why they matter. Does that pose a challenge to you? Does that intersect with your work at all?
Oh, it's a tremendous challenge. I think, you know, when you look at those polls, there are a sizable number of people that would love to get rid of the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. And it's largely because I think people need to have a better understanding of what those amendments protect in terms of their ability to live in this country vis-a-vis the government. But what they end up getting is they get messages. And so when they think of Fourth Amendments, which is your right to be free from searches and seizures, they automatically think loopholes. When they think of the 14th Amendment, which is to be able to ensure that the government doesn't discriminate on the basis of race and other things, then they think preferences and different things like that. So the Constitution has been weaponized in the public sphere so that people are feeling that these amendments and that these principles mean something different than they actually do. So that's a tremendous challenge. The other challenge is there's some parts of the Constitution, when you play it out, they just don't work. So we did, for example, the stop and frisk case in New York City, which we won in 2013. It was a really big case, and the court found that the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment were violated when stop and frisk happened. But here's the thing, the Fourth Amendment says that the cops can't search you for no reason. So for all of those 5 million stops, if people had said to the police officers, you can't search me, you can't stop me, I'm walking away, they would end up in the hospital or worse. Because so at some level, even with some government entities, exercising your constitutional rights can put you in the hospital or get you killed. And that's an interesting part and a problematic part of how we wrestle with the question of our constitutional rights versus government power. And then when you think about black and brown and poor folks and how they can exercise their constitutional rights, it's no wonder that people begin to think that they don't matter as much if what they're seeing is that as soon as I try to open my mouth and exercise them, I'm going to get a jackboot on my neck.
Right, absolutely. Then the inverse of that, I would think, or not the inverse, but the way I would take that is constitutional rights are something that are best protected through group action, through movement action, rather than, I might have better luck asserting my constitutional rights to a police officer than, for example, you. But nevertheless, it would still be a challenge even for me under certain circumstances. So, but if we get together and we organize a movement that says, don't do this, if we back certain cases, as you guys do, and argue certain cases, we can do that. So what is the intersection between, in your work, at the Center for Constitutional Rights, between the arguing or the adjudication of individual cases and the building of a movement coalition? How does that fit together in your mind?
Right, it's a great question. And constitutional rights, whether you are sort of a civil rights person that really thinks about group rights, or you're a civil libertarian that might think about individual rights, there is a thing that we have to understand, is that the rights framework doesn't work unless it works both for the individuals and for larger groups. It has to work for both. And that's where some of that tension comes in. With respect to social movements, it is clear that the more people get together and assert a notion or push for a policy or dissent or push back against a bad policy, it is easier to do that in larger numbers. Because essentially what you're saying is two things. You're daring the police to arrest all of us that think this, whereas one of us might get arrested for opening our big mouth in the wrong place. Right. And the other thing that you're doing is you're sending a message to the government that all of us think that what is happening right now is totally unacceptable and you have to do something about it. And at the heart of it, that's where the First Amendment free speech comes in. But the important piece happens when large groups of people get together. One of the things that happens is that historically we've seen that law enforcement like the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, singles out or looks for people that are leaders, or back in the days of COINTELPRO, they called them the messiahs, and starts to destabilize people from taking those types of stands, to motivate people to work together. We're actually seeing that in a case that we're doing now that we just presented here at Netroots called the Race Paper, where we and Color of Change have a Freedom of Information Act request from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, asking them for the information for how they're spying on Black Lives Matter activists. And they're refusing to give over a lot of that information. But we know from talking to the activists that the FBI is visiting them, they're visiting their families, that phones are being tapped and different things like that. So even as you form bigger groups to be able to push back, you see that law enforcement and government begins to try to pick you apart. And that's where it's really important for constitutional rights activists, not just to deal with the larger issues, but who are the people that are actually pushing for the society that we want to live in, and how are they getting pushed back?
We're talking with Vincent Warren, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. And Vince, you don't have to answer this, but although you're welcome to react to it, but one of the things that I've struggled with is that in the fight, the political fight against Donald Trump, I see a lot of people kind of idealizing maybe the FBI, maybe these folks, and And what I struggle with, you know where I'm going with
Oh,
this.
I know exactly
What
where
I
you're
struggle with this is somebody can be useful to you in a struggle. You don't have to make them your hero. And you mentioned Black Lives Matter. Now we also have this report, the FBI trying to tell us that there is something called a black identity extremist, which to me is an artificial construct of language used to isolate and stigmatize the leaders of a movement. Now, I don't know if you have any reaction to all of that, but I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Oh, I've got a lot of reaction to all of that. I'm so glad that you asked the question, RJ. There is the reason why everybody feels so destabilized, I think, in the country right now, is that you will remember when Trump was, right before he became president, he started pushing back on his own intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA. Everybody was against it. It was because of this crazy Russia stuff, which he's also ultimately going to get caught on, but that's what he was doing. And people were saying, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. I've never heard of a president distancing itself from his own law enforcement arm. And if people thought that's really interesting and it's an opportunity. We were actually trying to get President Obama to distance himself from his law enforcement arm in ways that he didn't. But what we end up with is now, with the firings and with the probe, that people are mistaking what should be rightful independence of law enforcement for creating civil rights icons. Robert Mueller, people think Robert Mueller is a savior. Here's the thing. Before Robert Mueller got the position of special counsel, he was a defendant in our lawsuit. And he was a defendant of a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court where we were trying to hold him accountable, Robert Mueller, for his role in rounding up Muslim and Arab men in New York and throwing them in jail and beating them and deporting them right after 9/11. It was a total sweep of Arab and Muslim men. Robert Mueller was one of the people that was responsible for it. So now we're in a situation where Robert Mueller is, in Star Wars terminology, our only hope. But people shouldn't get it twisted. Robert Mueller is doing a job just like he was doing a job right after 9/11, and that if we think about it as how do we connect with the mission that he has now without giving him status that basically people in law enforcement shouldn't have, is really the key to the whole thing. So the left has been trying to destabilize the oppressive power of law enforcement for the longest time, and this president has now destabilized the power of law enforcement, and that's what makes people feel a little crazy. But people on the left should not get confused about that.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you there, and I guess as a last topic of discussion in our last couple minutes here, and I hope we get a chance to talk again soon, but what are the key issues you all are working on now at the Center for Constitutional Rights?
So we're working on a number of issues that I think are of national importance. We're working on a lot of local issues as well. Issue number one is asylum. So everybody is talking about family separation and the horrible things that are going on in the immigration context. What we have to remember, and people who think politically in terms of geopolitics, every local immigration problem has a connected foreign policy problem. And the connected foreign policy problem has been the U.S. role in Central America and all of this kind of stuff. So a year ago, in July of last year, before even Donald Trump was elected, we filed a lawsuit with a group called Al Otro Lado, which does work on both sides of the border, challenging the fact that people were being denied entry into the United States based upon valid asylum claims 1 year ago. And that case is still pending in the courts. And so when you connect that to the criminalizations of the borders that the Sessions Justice Department has done, so now people get prosecuted all over the place, you have the following scenario. The government has closed off all entries to valid asylum claims that are internationally recognized and even under our law, and they've criminalized every other way into the country. And if you know anything about people that are fleeing violence, that they're going to try to move their families into safety. And essentially what this administration has done has made coming to the United States less safe than not coming to the United States. And that is in my view, a conspiratorially unconstitutional framework that is designed to pump up 30% of the racist population in the United States. But that is going to be a really key issue that's moving forward this year.
So very well said, and I think perhaps as my last statement that I'll let you respond to. So to me that means the challenge for people who consider themselves progressives or on the right side of this issue is to think holistically. In other words, not just to fight the horrific abuses of asylum taking place under the Trump administration, but to be aware that there's a history behind that, and to be aware that there are intersecting forces behind it, and to be aware that if you care about asylum today, as you should also have cared about our State Department's inaction during the Obama years for the murdering of labor leaders in Honduras or the creation of other situations of violence in Salvador or elsewhere, so that if people can somehow bring an organic view of these situations, we will be better fighters for asylum rights and for other rights. And your thoughts on that?
I think that's exactly right. I think largely people have to be anti-militaristic in their international human rights view in order to be humanistic domestically. And so we see that in terms of destabilizing regimes, like you were saying, in the past and ongoing. It's also with respect to with war making in different countries. So using drone warfare in places like Yemen is creating in addition to the civil war, is creating a population of Yemenis who are fleeing into Djibouti. We actually sent a group of staff and met with people in Djibouti. The people in Djibouti, the Yemenis, are not able to come into the United States because of the Muslim ban. And so we're creating a scenario where the U.S. foreign policy is creating the humanitarian crisis that's creating the migrant group that nobody wants to have anything to do with. And that holistic view, as hard as it is for some people to get their heads around, is where you have to start unpacking these things. You really don't start packing it by saying who comes in and who comes out. You start unpacking that thing by asking this question: why are we being militarily aggressive with this particular regime? What's going to happen to that population, and are we willing to take in the people that we're displacing?
You know, there was a Simpsons episode where there was a hurricane and everybody had to go to the church, and the sign in front of the church said, "God welcomes his victims." And I feel that, so maybe the step, first of all, is to welcome our victims, and secondly, to start thinking in terms where we don't create future victims of our policies the way we are by providing material support to the Saudi attacks in Yemen or what we're doing in other parts of the world. So I think we'll have to leave it there. But Vincent Warren, Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights, where can people go to find out more about your work?
You can find out about us by going to our website, which is ccrjustice.org. We also have a new podcast. We believe that with a lawyer, an activist, and a storyteller, you can change the world. And so we have a podcast called The Activist File, which you can find on any of the usual platforms, iTunes, Spotify, etc. You should download that, and people should subscribe to it, because we tell the story not just of the lawyers telling you what's going on. These are the real people, the activists, the organizers, the musicians, and the journalists that are in the work on the front lines, that are giving us a lot of information that would be really useful for us moving forward.
Well, that sounds great. Again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much, RJ. I appreciate it.
You bet. And this is Richard R.J. Eskow for Free Speech TV.